What's your wholesome experience with a stranger? I was once walking down an empty street late at night alone to find my dog. A stranger who was heading home stopped to help me find my dog and didn't leave until I found him. Nissy, we need more of those kinds of people. Once when I was still in my painted black phase, I went to the grocery store with my dad. Keep in mind this is a very conservative semi-small church culture town. I am above average height and that day I was wearing high heel boots. So there I am with the black dress and the fringe and everything, and this tiny old woman randomly approached me. My heart freezes for a second. I flinch inwardly. You are so tall, my darling, and so very pretty. Rough translation. This tiny ass old church looking lady came over not to ridicule me but to give me a genuine compliment, and my heart just melted. I still think about it regularly. When your style is more alternative, it's always a surprise when old people are nice to you, lol. There is an older guy that rides his bike the same route as me. Every time we see each other we race. I ride fixed. He's a roadie. We don't even really talk to each other. We just race. I haven't seen him a long time. But I was driving one day and saw him riding a fixed gear bike and I got all excited. I used to see a guy who bike commuted the opposite direction of me every day. It got to the point where we'd nod to each other and it'd kind of be able to judge how late I was running by when we'd pass each other. This went on semi-regularly for a couple years until I stopped seeing him and figured he'd moved. 2. One where I was the good guy and one where I got helped by the good guy. I was on a flight from Europe to the US. We were flying with our 6-month-old baby. Flight was fine. Baby slept most of the time and I struck up a conversation with some Swiss dude sitting next to me. We land in DC and have about a 4-hour layover. A couple hours into the layover, while wandering around, some guy runs up to us. It was the dude from the plane. We had forgotten our baby's blanket on the plane, but he had remembered that we were flying on to Oklahoma City, so he had taken it to the gate for our next flight and given it to the staff with a description of us. Super cool dude. Once I was walking home from work and saw this little girl, probably like 8 or 9 years old, standing on the sidewalk. She was alone, crying and looked distressed. I asked if she needed help and she told me that her band practice or whatever had ended early, but she couldn't call her mum to come pick her up because some bullies had stolen her cell phone. I live in a busy city and felt bad because people were just walking by and not helping her. Luckily she knew her mom's number, so I called her mum, explained the situation, gave her the phone so that she could talk to her mum, and then waited there with her until her mum got there to pick her up. You're a good man. I was crossing the street in between the crosswalks, so like at the middle of the block, and this much older Chinese man who was doing food delivery on a bicycle was also crossing, but from the opposite side. We kind of came like diagonally at each other and couldn't decide who should move over to let the other pass, so we wound up standing face to face with each other and not moving for like 10 seconds. And then we both just bursted out laughing and went our separate ways, lol. It was such a perfect, comically human moment that for some reason I feel lucky to have shared with a stranger. Here are two people who couldn't be more different from one another, and for a single moment in time, and without exchanging a single word, we totally understood each other. In February 2020, I met an angel. I still think about him. Here's the story. I had just sat down on an international flight home to see my unexpectedly ailing father when I got a call saying he was on a ventilator and may not survive the night. The man next to me very obviously overheard everything, but didn't say anything. On the flight though, he pulled out a snack and offered me some. This was his way of initiating conversation with me. He said he had overheard the call about my dad and repeatedly expressed a genuine desire for him to pull through. He also told me that it'd be okay no matter what happened. We hugged it out when we deplaned and he again expressed good wishes. If this stranger had not engaged with me, I would have spent the flight silently crying and being in my head. He made that 2-hour flight bearable. Wow, the smallest light can really help in total darkness. May I ask if you got to see your father before he passed away? I've shared this story before, but I'll never forget the impact this experience had on me. When I was a kid we didn't have a lot of money, so we often shopped at thrift stores. What I loved about that was that you could get 10 books for $1. So I would plant myself in front of the book section and make piles of which one I wanted to get, and then decided after I'd gone through them all. One day an older lady saw me sitting with my piles and asked if I liked to read. I told her I did and showed her a few of the books I found that I liked. She smiled and then pulled $1 out of her purse, handed it to me and said, "Promise me that you'll keep reading." I was so happy and immediately stood up and said that I would. She smiled and walked away and I went back to my piles, able to pick out an extra 10 books to take home. It was just a small act of kindness for her, but for me, having a random stranger encourage my love of reading and making me promise to never stop definitely had a lot to do with my continued love of reading. This was over 20 years ago, but I still think of her whenever I buy a new book. I had something like that happen to me once when I was younger. I repaid that debt years later, and much better off financially, by slipping my daughter's kindergarten teacher $100 to buy books at the book fair for kids whose parents didn't have money. Books are so liberating. When I was 5, I saw a woman standing with a priest in a graveyard. I was curious because she was crying and I didn't yet understand death. I went up to her and held her hand for little over an hour. She told me she would have been blessed to have a son like me with her husband. I later figured out he died and they were both all alone. Very sad and wholesome at the same time. I think about it every day. If you don't mind me asking, where were your parents during this? Maybe my rock bottom moment? I was moved from Los Angeles to New Jersey in the middle of winter to get thrown into rehab. My family lied to me to get me to move. Said I'd have the place to myself. They had a condo right on the beach that I was going to stay at rent-free to get mentally healthy again. No. So just throwing it out there now. Rehab is something the addict needs to choose for themselves. Anyway, it's my second day there. I'm losing my shit because not only am I going through withdrawals, but I'm there against my will in some place I've never been. So I escaped. I packed my bags, walked right out the door, not even knowing where I was in the state, and started walking. I was hoping to figure out which way the beach was, but I was in the middle of the snowy woods with no sense of direction. I realized that if it took an hour to drive here from the condo, it'll probably take a lot longer to walk. So I decided to play my luck further and stuck my thumb out to hitchhike a ride. Not only did a person pick me up and not murder me, but 2 cars picked me up and didn't attempt to murder me. The first one took me a good portion of the way. The second one got me to the condo. I, of course, was on my defense, had a pen in hand, ready to attack if anything got weird. But they were kind enough to let me warm up in the car and get me along as far as they could take me. I thanked them both over and over for their kindness and marched my way up the steps to the condo, only to find no one was home. When they left me at the rehab center, they took my keys and my phone, so I had no one to call, and no way to let myself in. Cue the meltdown. I'm freaking livid. Freezing. It's 16 degrees outside and I'm stuck on the windy ocean front with a duffel bag of clothes from California, and nowhere to go. I'm thinking to myself, this is it. I've finally fricked up so bad. I'm probably going to die now. Out of sheer anger at myself and my parents, I decide I'm going to kick in this condo door and get warm. But the front door was on a step, which was hard to get the right angle to get a solid kick into it. So I just tried slamming my body up against the door, but felt like I was only doing damage to my body. Just as I was giving into the sadness and ready to give up, the door next door opens. It's a neighbor I've never met who has no idea why some guy is trying to break in next door. I try to catch my breath to tell him, I'm sorry, I'm their son. I'm just trying to get warm. etc. He was an older man, late 50s, who was making breakfast for his daughter in their kitchen when he heard my kicking at the door. He invited me in, gave me some hot coffee, started chatting with me while the daughter wanted to show me her schoolwork and tell me about their plans for the day. They were getting ready to go get her dress for some school event when he asked if there was anyone I could call. I was able to get in touch with my aunt, who recommended I go back to the rehab center. I was ready to plead with her there over the phone to let me stay with them. But something about this guy and the kid made me feel safer than anyone from my entire family. I decided to accept my fate and asked the kind stranger if he could take me back, to which he was more than happy to help. The car ride back to rehab was the exact opposite experience I had when going into rehab. We talked about his brother who had similar problems to my own, but he spoke with such love for his brother. It broke my heart to think I was in the same boat. But this guy reassured me if his brother could get better, So can I. Something truly resonated that day for me. I didn't want to be a burden to the world from the pain my parents gave me. I wanted to be healed and to help heal others like this guy. The kindest stranger I ever met. Thank you, Mr. Gray. Hands pressed together. Edited for grammar and punctuation. Thank you for the award. Hope you're doing well, my dude. A long time ago a woman's card declined while buying groceries. So she was doing that whole remove an item and swipe again thing. I got extremely frustrated, but every other line was long, so moving wasn't an option. I said, frick this, I wanna go home and eat. I paid for all the groceries to make my life easier and get home after a long 12-hour shift. She asked for my phone number so she could eventually pay me back. I gave it to her but told her to only text me when she had paid it forward because I didn't need the money. I randomly received a text a few years later that said, I finally paid it forward. Was lost. Thought they had the wrong number, but they specifically saved it to tell me they were doing well enough to pay it forward finally. At that time I was going through a really rough time, and that text actually brought me out of the funk I was in. I love this one. Thanks for sharing. It's a good reminder that someone can still do good. I was crying dramatically in the rain at a crosswalk over some dumb thing I don't even remember, and this old man who stopped at the same crosswalk stood next to me and slowly raised his umbrella for me and walked across the road with me. I was crying hard and couldn't get a thank you out though. I hope he's doing fine. I received a letter from the parent of a guy, inmate, at the prison where I worked. It said, I want you to know because of your kindness to my son he was able to spend his birthday with his brother and family for the first time in years. He told us you were one of the few people he could count on to treat him like a human. Your diligence in getting errors corrected by the court has helped him trust again. He is enrolled in school. Thank you, sir. Very few people take time to do this and it made my day. Crashed with my bicycle and the chain came off. I was fine. Random cyclist stops, lifts my bike, and with 3 quick moves puts the chain back. It happened so fast. I didn't even see what she did. I wanted to at least give her some money for a coffee but off she went. What an absolute pro. Thanks, random stranger. A somewhat scary biker that lived up the street from me as a kid saw me do the same. My hand-me-down bike spit the chain off and I ate shoot. He walked out of his fortified yard that had a scary dog in it. Dog stayed motionless within the yard. He was smoking a cigarette and silently put my bike chain back on. I thanked him and he quietly went back into his yard and relocked the gate. Not sure if this fits. I was walking out of a pro soccer game on a sidewalk near a busy road. My girlfriend was closest to the road and all I did was move her away from the road and take her spot. These older guys in a car driving by rolled the windows of their down and yelled at me. That was very chivalrous and we love it. Scared the crap out of me for a second but it's something I'll remember for a long time. We love it. My family was driving through Mexico in a motorhome after my high school graduation. We came to a fork in the road, but there were no signs. So we were stopped there for a bit as we pulled out maps and tried to figure out which road would go to Mérida. This was before cell phones. Never mind GPS. No one noticed the commuter bus behind us until it honked. So we pulled over to let it pass. He pulled up beside us and asked if we needed help. We explained where we were heading, and the driver told us to follow him. We followed him for about 10 minutes before he motioned for us to pull up beside him again. He gave us the last couple turns we needed and then explained he needed to head back because his route actually goes the other way at the fork where he found us. I couldn't believe he took his whole bus 10 minutes out of the way just to show us the way. I looked at his passengers and not a single one even seemed upset. A few even waved and smiled as they departed. I loved all of Mexico, but the people in the Yucatan were amazingly friendly. Since then, I've always tried to help strangers to my city. Had come back after a football game to my dorm and was playing some games. Had to use the bathroom and saw some chicks. They were cute and it was obvious they were intoxicated. I came back to my room and unpaused my game. About 5 minutes later I get a knock. It was the cute girl. Again, knowing she was drunk, I knew to not do anything. So I was honestly trying to get her to leave the mayo. But she stayed at my door and started drawing on my door whiteboard. She asked me my name and I gave her it and she drew a massive penis and said, "This is my name's Duck." I laughed and she took my phone and added her number to my phone. I went to bed that night and woke up to a text from her. a year later and we've become really good friends. Strange, but fun story nonetheless. I was in the nursing home visiting my wife's grandmother. Our son was about 8 months old. An elderly lady who couldn't speak was very interested in our kiddo and motioned to let her hold him. I figured why not and let her hold him for a few minutes, with us hovering over her as she was frail and couldn't speak. The joy in her eyes broke my heart a bit. IDK what memories that brought back for her, but I could tell it really made her day. Maybe not my best move as a parent, letting some stranger hold my kiddo. But something in me just told me she needed a little love at that moment, and the way she gestured us after was in a way that showed she really appreciated us letting her have a moment with our little one. This was pre-COVID BTW. Fellow parent, it's perfectly fine to let others interact with your kids. I was trying to get to this village of like 60-ish people. As you can imagine, not a lot of traffic in the area. So I'm walking in 40 degrees Celsius weather on this road forgotten by the world itself that stretches from the previous bigger village and all the way to the one I'm trying to get to with another one in between. Somewhere along the way, I'm straight up about to pass out when this janky 90s Ford shows up at the horizon rolling towards me. I saw they were packed so I didn't even try to hitch it, but they stopped anyways. They took me in even though we had to basically climb on top of each other. 7 people. Small Ford. We probably looked like a clown car. They were this super sweet family on their way to pick an onion field in the village before mine. I told them they could just drop me off there and I'd walk the rest. But they absolutely refused and insisted they drive me all the way. They told me all about their crops, their life in the countryside and how everything was simpler there, and asked me about the city. They asked me why I'm trying to get to the middle of freaking nowhere, and when I told them, getting all emotional in the process, they offered me compassion and a word of advice. It was incredibly wholesome. I hope they're doing well these days and their onions are flourishing.